so that's really fun too. While you're settling in, I would recommend going ahead if you'd like to follow along hands-on and open up the sample Excel file that Devin emailed to you last Friday and keep it handy in the background. That'll just save load times, etc. When that kind of hands-on part starts. And if you did decide to download a trial version of Tableau and you wish to follow along when we get to that part, I recommend once again also opening that file just to save on some load time. Um, but let's go ahead and get started. So what Devin and I had mapped out for learning outcomes is actually quite lofty, but I'm going to do my best. I hope by the end of today's session, you will understand and have some idea about how to collect, organize, and manage student data in Excel and prepare it for comprehensive analysis. You'll have some confidence to work with an Excel and Tableau to create insightful visualizations that effectively communicate student success metrics and trends, and that you'll be able to understand how to interpret data results to inform decision-making processes uh, that we hope will lead to targeted improvements in library services that can enhance student success. So for, I think about the first 15 to 20 minutes, I'll be
You can't
discussing
listen
some,
to each other's because they'll be.
uh, for the first 15 or 20 minutes, I'll be discussing some concepts and terminology related to data collection and management. And then I'll do some show and tell hands-on exercises that you can follow along with on your own computers. But before digging in and actually working with data, I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes to help set the stage and ground you in what I refer to as user impact or student success work. So before you begin even thinking about requesting or pulling data that you'll need to do this work, I find it helpful to pause for a few moments and write out what you want to know, why you want to know it, and what you'll do once you know. I find it helpful to outline these things in what I refer to as a user stories format, which is a concept that originated in agile tech development, but can easily be adapted for library and student success focused research. So essentially, a user story includes three parts: an actor, that's typically you, an object or something that you want to know, in an action, something that you'll do once you know the answer to your question. So let's put that in the context of an example. So remember, we want to focus on the actor or person, their goal, what they want to know, and why they want to know it, or what they're going to do once they know it. So in this example, the actor is a librarian. This could be you, it could be me. It is often me. I live a lot in this space. And then your goal or what you want to know. For example, I want to know whether library engagement or the amount of library engagement impacts year 1 to year 2 undergraduate student retention. You could also frame this in terms of graduation rates. Does library engagement impact um, 4-year or 6-year graduation rates, or a student's GPA or performance in a course? And then the last part of that user story is the purpose, outcome, or reason, the why you want to know so that you can do something. For example, I want to know about library engagement and its relationship with retention so that I can potentially, given depending upon the answer, encourage faculty to require use of more library resources in their teaching content and assignment design, and encourage students to increase their library resource use. Again, this is assuming that our findings will indicate that library use um, helps promote student success. And from there, you want to reframe this as a question that can be answered with data. So essentially, it's that part in the user story that's in blue. So simply put, does library engagement, or you could also look at the amount of library engagement, impact year 1 to year 2 undergraduate student retention. In this case, you would look at um, retention as the dependent variable, if you're putting this in terms of kind of research terminology. And for the dependent variable, that's a variable that we wonder, will it change depending on library engagement? And then in the independent variable is our library engagement. You could also have different dependent variables, like, as I said, 4-year or 6-year graduation, GPA, etc. But for the purposes of today's workshop or webinar, I'm going to be carrying forward with this library engagement and student retention scenario, just so that we have something to work with for our examples. So once you have a good idea about what you want to know, then it's time to actually map out what data you'll need to answer your questions. So doing student or patron impact work, sometimes you may be wondering, does library collaboration with the library by faculty improve their chances for publication? So you can frame this in a lot of different ways, but you'll generally need a unique person identifier to link information about the student or the patron, what they did or how they engaged with you, in some sort of outcome measure like retention, graduation, etc. Most generally, you'll also want to know some additional information about the students, like did they enter the university as a freshman or a transfer student? Maybe you're interested in if they're a first generation student, if differences between library engagement and success between first gen students or non first gen students. Maybe you're looking at, want to look at college of enrollment or the major, or maybe a person's race or ethnicity, any of those kind of i- bits of information about the actual people who are engaging with the library. And for engagement data, I typically like to have the associated date and time stamps. So like anytime a person checks out a book, for example, there is a date and time stamp that's associated in the back end of the system, so that you know when that engagement happened, in case you're wanting to parse your data out based on semesters or different years, etc. Data that you'll likely need to answer your questions will come from generally a variety of sources, and then you'll need to link those sources together. And I'll demonstrate how to do that, or we'll work through that together in a few minutes. So library data sources can include a lot of different things. It could include information about students' engagement, like entering the library, if you have card taps to enter the library, or some kind of reservation system that indicates if a student reserved a library study room. That typically will generate some data that you can then use to understand that engagement. Um, let's see here. The use of library resources could include checking out books or accessing online materials, engagement with a librarian or library service might include participating in reference consultations or attending a library instruction session, or even attending an event. And I usually find that I want to pair that data from information that at my institution, we call it the Office of Institutional Research. That's the group who are the kind of the keepers of the data from our student information system. At our university, we use Banner. So I usually contact institutional research and ask for a specific data file that includes, for example, um, in this example, I asked for a list of all undergraduate degree seeking first year students who entered the university in fall of 2021. And in addition to that, I want to know if they were retained for a second year of study. I want to know their cumulative GPA at the end of each year, And maybe if I was doing some other work, I would want to know how long did they graduate and how long it took them to graduate. Sometimes you may be able to collaborate with faculty for information related to a particular course or assignment and related outcomes like grades. And finally, you may find it interesting and useful to partner with and include campus partner data, for example, from co-curricular colleagues like the Writing Center or the Tutoring Center, or even extracurricular student engagement that's typically captured from student affairs offices. So remember, in our main question related to that user story, we're asking whether library engagement or the amount of library engagement impacts student retention. So from here, we need to define what we mean by library engagement. When you're doing this work, you just kind of need to be specific so that you know how to analyze your data. So library engagement, of course, can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And in today's workshop and the sample data set that I provided to you, I've simply selected these three types of engagement as how I'm going to operationalize library engagement. So I want to know the number of book checkouts per first year student. That's going to be my equivalent to resource usage. I want to know the number of study room reservations uh, a first year student placed, and I want to know if students participated in the library instruction. So those are kind of the different ways that I have decided in this version of the study to look at student engagement. And then from the Office of Institutional Research, um, you can see at a minimum, these are the types of data I asked for. I wanted a student identifier. I wanted to know if what their status was in year one, what their status was at the beginning of year two. Did they enter the university as a freshman or transfer student? That's what I mean by admission status. And then just a little bit of basic demographic information like their college. And I think I said this earlier, but um, so the data set that I provided to you has all of these types of information. But for the purposes of today's demonstration, I'm going to focus in on library instruction as one measure of engagement and how that relates to or potentially impacts year one to year two retention. And I often find it helpful to outline the data I need, including the variables that I'm looking for. And and remember, you will need some way in each of your data sets. So this would come to me in 4 different data sets. I need some way to link the student's participation or engagement with the library to what the institutional research office. Sometimes you could also get this information from the registrar. So you need a common identifier to link your materials together. So kind of the next thing to think about, and this is where we kind of pull up our sleeves and get busy, is getting our data ready for analysis. It's almost a guarantee that you'll need to do what I call data cleaning and organizing before you can begin to visualize or analyze it. So in a nutshell, data cleaning involves fixing or removing correctly formatted data. Sometimes you may have some corrupted fields that need to be fixed or deleted. Sometimes you may have some incomplete data that you need to figure out how to supplement. So that's kind of the data cleaning part of things. And data organizing is where I spend a lot of my time. And that involves connecting your disparate data sets, like those 4 data sets I showed on the previous screen. Maybe you're creating new variables with categories to combine like items. Maybe you're converting words into numbers. For example, if you did a survey and you used, like, on a scale of 1 to 5, what's your whatever, what's your rating? And maybe you used words instead of numbers. So you'd need to like clear out the words and only use the numbers in your analyses, things like that. So visually speaking, data cleaning and organizing can allow you to take what I'm calling messy data from disparate sources. This is what um, the four data sets that we're starting with, taking that and turning it into a single connected data set that's ready for analysis. And in doing this kind of work, I strongly recommend that you also have or create a data dictionary that defines each variable. And if it's a categorical variable, meaning it's a variable that has, different designations, what each of those designations mean. Um, as I do this work, I am constantly referring back to my data dictionary, especially when I'm trying to remember, for example, what a race of a five means, or which college represents which number. So the data dictionary is critical. So to carry out this cleaning and organizing work, I primarily rely on three Excel features or tools or tricks of the trades. If you know how to do pivot tables, VLOOKUP formulas, and use filters, that's kind of the foundation for knowing for what you need to know to get your data ready. And that's what we're going to focus on for the first part of today's tutorial. So first, I'm going to just talk about each of these things, then we'll go into the Excel file. So first, pivot tables are essential to this kind of work. A pivot table is a powerful tool that you can use to calculate, summarize, and analyze data that lets you see comparisons, patterns, or trends. So on the left, what I'm calling the raw instruction data, this is just a sampling of data that I downloaded from SpringShare's LibInsight, um, which is how we capture our instruction data at our university. And you can see here on the left, for example, there's a student ID that begins with the number 3049. And this particular student participated in 4 or 5 different library instruction sessions. When we're preparing to do our data analysis, we would want each student in each of our files to be listed only once and then have the total number of instruction sessions totaled up for the particular analysis that I have in mind. So I would simply use a pivot table to take the raw data and summarize it in just like 2 or 3 keystrokes. VLOOKUP formulas and lookup tables are another essential tool for doing the student impact work and getting your data ready for analysis. The VLOOKUP formulas allow you to link separate data sets together using a common identifier. So over on the left is just a screenshot of kind of the main worksheet, the cleaned up end product, where I have my student ID over here in column A, and I want to bring in the library instruction total for each student. So I would just use a formula like this highlighted in red to connect the information from the instruction pivot table that we just talked about on the previous screen and bring it into our main worksheet. And again, I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. And if you are interested in learning more about um, VLOOKUPs, I've linked a really helpful quick reference card at the bottom that you can refer back to when Devin shares the slides after the session today. And then finally, Excel filters are a must. They're extremely useful and super simple, especially when I'm looking at categorical data to make sure the format and categories make sense or to create new categories. For example, if I had the total number of instruction sessions a student attended in their first year, and I wanted to make a new variable, what I'm going to call a dichotomous variable. Dichotomous just means two. So a variable that indicates if a student participated in library instruction or not. Like, so it would be a 0 or a 1. I could use a filter to help me create that variable again with just a few keystrokes. And we'll do that together in just a moment. So at this point, I am going to open up that Excel file, the same file that Devin shared with you on email. So bear with me while I switch screens for a minute. Okay, so now you're still seeing the Excel, you're still seeing my screen with the Excel file?
Yes.
Okay,
We have a quick question from Susan that I was wondering, Becky, if you could answer.
sure.
How do you get the student ID in your raw data? Do you ask each student to fill out a Lib Insight form for each instruction session they attend, or do you export a class list and import it into Lib Insight?
It's more like the second version. We actually at UNC Charlotte um, have students when they attend an instruction session enter, they use their phones to text that they're present, and we associate that on the back end with the Lib Insight or the course information that they've attended. And then I bring in the associated course roster that's available through Banner. But with the students' texted information, then I'm able to look at the roster and automatically determine who is actually present at the time of the session. So we do rely heavily on the rosters. And a lot of universities will rely on the rosters, but not worry about the were the students actually there, just making a presumption that they were. Super great question. And that was one of our trickiest things to figure out. Okay, so back to our data set. So you can see down here on the bottom of my screen, I hope you can see on the bottom of my screen, we've got several different tabs here. We've got the clean data set. So that's like after all of our work is said and done. You most generally won't be starting with the clean data set. You'll be starting with a bunch of messy data coming from your different sources. For example, down here, the student information from IR, that's what I asked the Office of Institutional Research to provide me. And you can see here, they use some different kinds of codes for some of their column headings or field headings, which is where I would rely on that data dictionary. They actually provided me with a data dictionary um, for those particular fields. Over here to the right, it's instruction raw. So this is kind of the blending of information that our librarians entered into LibInsight when they taught a particular course that then I matched to the course rosters and students' presence in those courses. For we're interested in book checkouts, I simply downloaded um, item checkouts from our integrated library system. And you can see here it includes different types of item types. So if I was only looking at books, I would need to filter out to discard the other information. And by the way, this is all just made up student IDs. And then our reservation system. We have a study room reservation system where students reserve a study room. And so I've downloaded a sampling of those data for a particular year for our purposes of our examples. So I always find it helpful to take a tour of the data to know what I'm working with. And I also recommend either keeping a backup file of your raw data, the original files you get, or at a minimum creating a new tab, like I call it a working tab, so that I'm keeping my raw data intact so I can always get back to it if I need to or if I've messed up. So let's begin by just clicking a plus sign over on the right side of the screen, which creates a new sheet. And I'm going to delete this working tab. I'm not sure if you had that working tab. That's like the finished product. We're going to make our own new finished product. So I've created a new sheet that I'm going to call working. And the first thing I'm going to do is go into the student info from institutional research. And I'm just going to highlight column A, which are the student IDs. And I am just going to paste them into our working tab under column A. So when I asked for the list of information from institutional research, I asked for all of the incoming students, undergraduate incoming students for that year. So that's kind of going to be my master list of students. And from there, we're going to connect in information about students' engagement with the library. And it's helpful to have the master list so that you can determine who is actually engaged with the library and who has not. Otherwise, you'd only be looking at, if you're only looking at library engagement data, who has engaged. But a critical part of doing this work is identifying population subgroups who have not engaged with the library. So anyway, now we have our list of student IDs. I'm just going to change this to student ID. Just easier for my brain to understand. And in our data set, I'm just scrolling down to the bottom. We have 6,765 student IDs in our data set, which equates to an incoming class at UNC Charlotte of undergraduate students. So we've gotten started, and now the next thing I'd like to do is create a summary of how many instruction sessions each student participated in during our year of interest. So to do that, I'm going to go to Instruction Raw. This is our raw instruction data. And we are going to create a pivot table. So to do that, I'm going to click in this upper left corner of my screen. That just highlights everything. And then I'm going to go to Insert, and then Pivot Table is this icon over on the left. And I typically just go with the default. That's going to be just fine for me. And that opens up a new sheet that I'm going to call Instruction Pivot. So right now we kind of just have this blank canvas, and over on the right, we have this section called Pivot Table Fields. So this is where we're going to set up our pivot table. So for example, for this first example, let's just kind of get an understanding of library instruction data. How many students have participated in library instruction? Oh, let's see. We're creating a summary table. I've gotten ahead of myself. We're creating a summary table for total number of instruction sessions per student. So we want student ID. We're going to drag this field down into rows. That lists all of the IDs of the students who showed up in the instruction data set. Now I'm going to take that same student ID field and drag it under values. And then right now the default, Excel just defaults to a value as a sum. And we want to change that to a count because we're counting how many times each student shows up in the instruction data set. So we're simply clicking the downward arrow, clicking value field settings, and changing that to count. So now over on the left, hopefully you have just a tidy little simple table with the student IDs in the left and the count of the instruction engagements, the count of times the students showed up in that data set on the right. So with that in mind, now we can connect this information into our working master data set. So hopefully I haven't lost you all. Apologies if I'm going too fast. Devin is recording this session. So I'm going to go back to my working data set, and I'm just going to click in the first cell under B and say year one. I'm just going to put in a field name, lib instruction total. something like that. And so now here is where we're going to use the VLOOKUP formula to connect the instruction data into the working data set. So anytime you're beginning to create a formula in Excel, you start with equals. And then I'm just going to type in the word VLOOKUP. Even if you type a few letters, you should start getting this helper text down here on the bottom. So I typed in equals VLOOKUP. I'm going to do an open parenthesis. And now we're at the point of the equation that says lookup value. We're simply going to click in cell A2, the first student ID in the list. I'm going to press enter a comma. That just moves us to the next step in the equation. And now it says table array. So what we need to do now is tell the Excel where to look for a match. So the table array is in our instruction pivot. So I'm just going to click on this tab instruction pivot. And then I'm going to highlight the table array. That's just kind of the number of rows and columns in our data set. I just highlighted both columns A and B. I'm going to enter a comma, which moves us to the next part of our equation, which is column index number. This one was really confusing for me when I first started to learn this. So essentially what you're saying is, okay, Excel, look for a match. If you find a match, deliver the result that is in column B, except in the equation, they want you to number that column rather than use a letter. So column B is the second column. So I'm just going to enter a 2. And then comma one more time. And you can see we have 2 choices, true for approximate match, false for an exact match. I don't know why they use false for an exact match. That seems counterintuitive, but that's just the way it is. But we're going to enter false. So you should have an equation that looks something like what I have on my screen. And then at this point, I would just press enter, which is going to pop us back to our working data set. And you can see here this first student attended 1 library instruction session. So now we need to populate all 6,766 rows. So you can either drag, you can just grab by the right corner and drag down, or you can, if you see that little plus sign in the lower right corner of the cell, you can just double click and that will populate for you. And then I'm just gonna, it's always good to make sure the formula kind of went all the way down and filled your data set. And you can see here, I have something even in the last row, so that's good. So you're probably wondering about all of these NAs that are showing up on our screen. That simply means that when we did the VLOOKUP formula, there was not a match in that instruction pivot table for a particular student, which means they did not participate in library instruction. They didn't show up in the data set. So we're going to just do a quick fix for that. But first of all, notice that in all of these cells, it's actually a formula rather than a static value. And I recommend at this point that we convert these from formulas into those static stable values. And I'm simply going to highlight column B, right click and copy. And then I'm going to right click under paste options. I'm going to choose the second option for paste as values. And then I'm just going to hit escape to deselect or make it so that that dotted moving line is not there. So now if you click through the cells, you can see their values rather than formulas. we can actually sort our data set by column B so that everything's like in a high to low format. And to do that, that's pretty straightforward. I usually just click in this upper left corner to highlight everything. And then I go to data, sort. I usually click, make sure this box is clicked. My data has headers. And I'm going to sort by year one lib instruction total small to large and hit OK. This is just a simple housekeeping. You can see that there are a lot of students with those NAs. So I'm going to change those NAs to 0 because essentially those NAs are telling us that there was no instruction exposure for those students. So to do that, I'm simply going to use a filter. I'm highlighting column B. In Excel, I'm still under the data ribbon. You can see data is highlighted. And I'm simply going to select this filter icon, which is right in the middle of my ribbon on my screen. And I turn that filter on. So now I have a little downward caret here by our field name. And I am simply going to click the downward arrow, and you can see these are all of the various numbers that are represented in that column. I'm going to deselect that, and then I'm going to click NA, and I'm going to click blanks because I want to see what that blank is. And at this point, I'm just going to enter a 0 for that first NA, and I'm just going to drag the 0 down to populate the rest of the rows. You could also double click to do that more quickly if you wish. In that one blank row, I don't know why that is active. I've just deleted that. Now I'm back at the top of my page, and I'm going to look now and look at that filter again, and I can see we have 0 as a category and the NAs are gone. I'm going to turn off that filter. So now all of our students have an associated library instruction total value. So let's do another little exercise. So we know that students are participating in instruction or not, but we really don't know yet if they were retained, meaning did they come back for a second year of study or did they drop out after their first year? So now let's take a little exploration into the student info that institutional research gave us. I'm just going to click there, and I happen to know, let's see, let's go back. Let's actually go look at the data dictionary. So I'm going to be looking at two fields, this class 2021-80 and class 2022-80. At our university, they use this kind of a numerical system to indicate which semester in which year. So we're looking at 2021 80, which represents the 8th month, which represents August, which represents fall 2021. And you can see here there are some different choices for student classification, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, etc. And then we have the same options for the following fall of 2022. So now with that in mind, we can use filters to take a look to see if every student has a classification in fall 2021. So I'm going to put in a filter for both of those classes actually. I think I did that wrong. There we go. So what I'm looking to see is first, if every student in our data set has a classification for fall 2021 using this filter. And I can see everybody has a classification of either 1, 2, 3, or 4, meaning freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior. Then when I look at the following fall 2022, I can see that we have the freshman, sophomore, junior, seniors, but we also have these fields with a period and other fields with a blank. So those are telling us that those particular students did not have a classification in fall 2022. Thus, that's our indicator that they were not enrolled and thus were not retained. So we're going to use this AC class 2022 as our, we're going to turn that into our retention variable. And you see me looking over to the side sometimes. That's just to help make sure I have not lost total track on what I aim to be doing here. And I already see that I have gotten off track with my notes. So hopefully I can get on track without losing you all. So let's do another VLOOKUP formula, and we can just call it retention year 1, year 2, something like that. So we're going to bring in that status from the fall 2022 using a VLOOKUP formula. Again, starting with equals, VLOOKUP, open parenthesis. Now we got to go to the lookup value, which is the first student ID in the list, comma, moves us to the next item in the instructions, which is table array. This time we're going to go to student info from IR. I'm just usually highlight everything, comma. Now we need to count over to column I. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if there's a match with the student ID, we want the result that is in column, the 9th column. So comma, 9, comma, false. Close parenthesis, and then enter. And I'm just going to double click, which is actually bringing in the student status for that particular year. And so at this point, we want to turn these data into either a dichotomous variable. Either a 0 means they were not retained, or a 1 means they were retained. So we're going to use our filters. I'm going to turn a filter on. So let's first work with the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. So I deselected everything, and then I went back and selected 1, 2, 3, and 4. Freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So anybody that has those values, actually, I take that back. We're going to backtrack here. Let's put the filter back on. Anybody that has a 0 or a period or a blank, let's assign a 0, meaning they were not retained. So right now we just have those cells active. And now we're just going to replace all of those with a 0. If I would have done it in the reverse order, I think we could have accidentally overwritten something. So all of these students we just turned to 0 were not retained for year 2. Now I'm going to go back into the data set and change and have all the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. Let's turn those into 1s. And some of them are already 1s, but we're going to just do it again anyway. So you can see most of our students were retained. So now if we go back to our filter, we should only have 0s and 1s. There is a blank that slipped in there. Just going to delete that. So now we have 0 meaning not retained, 1 meaning retained. I'm sorry if that got a little confusing, but hopefully you're still tracking with me. Let's do one more quick exercise here using filters, and then we will go into the next phase of our work. So currently we know how many instruction sessions a student attended in their first year. But let's say we wanted to create just a simple library instruction dichotomous variable, meaning 0 means no instruction, 1 means 1 or more instruction sessions. So we can easily use filters to get our data to help us create that new variable. So I'm going to just create a year 1 lib instruction, and I'm going to call this dicot, meaning 2. Sometimes we may have 4 categories. I'd call that a categorical variable. They behave very similarly. Now I'm going to highlight column B, our library instruction total, put a filter on, and anything that is a 0 or a blank, I'm going to just put in a 0 in our dichotomous variable. Looks like there are a lot of students that did not receive library instruction. So I'm just populating the column with the zeros. I could have done the auto populate. That would have been a little faster. Now let's go back to our filter. Deselect, or let's select everything, deselect 0. So everybody else is just going to have a 1, meaning they participated in 1 or more library instruction session. Just taking a look. And now I'm just going to go ahead and turn that filter off from column B and put a filter on for column D just to do a cross check to make sure we're good. So column D should only have 0s and 1s. I do see there's a blank in there. That blank just keeps slipping in there. I'm going to delete that. And now I've just turned my filter off. So now we have a new dichotomous variable. I'm going to stop here at this point as far as this part of the tutorial, but you can look back at this working data set if you wish. I've created some tabs. Let's see. There's a tab for clean data. This is just a mirror of what we were working on, just I've expanded it to include these demographic variables from institutional research and the rest of the library engagement variables. And I also created a clean data dictionary so that if you want to explore the data on your own, you know what it means. At this point, I'm going to go back to our slides for a few moments. So this is just a quick recap of what we did with our data cleaning and organizing tutorial. We familiarized ourselves with the data. We reviewed and discussed the data dictionary. We used a pivot table to summarize instruction data. We also use filters. We use VLOOKUP formulas to link student information with instruction data, and we use filters to create a new categorical or dichotomous variable. We actually did that for retention and for library instruction. Let's move to the second part of our workshop today related to data visualization. So people have been talking about data visualization for years, but there's definitely been an uptick in talking about data visualization and data-driven decision making. So essentially, when we're talking about data visualization, we're just presenting our data in pictorial or generally graphical formats. And doing so can allow you to identify new patterns or grasp difficult concepts. And with interactive data visualizations like we'll be working on today, it allows you to drill down and dig a little deeper into your data. So we're going to try to tackle that today using both Excel, using pivot tables and filters to visualize data and unlock insights. So we use our pivot tables to summarize data, but we can use them in different ways too. Pros is this quick setup, great for exploration. Most people have Excel. Cons is it's not quite as easily shared and digestible by others as, for example, Tableau is. So Tableau, um, the pros is it's easily shareable. You can just generate a link, share the visualizations, great for exploring, a little prettier, has better visual appeal. You can consolidate information onto a single dashboard. And the cons is the licensing can be costly. I'm fortunate that my library paid for a full desktop version. I'll show you enough to get you started, but there is a learning curve that a lot of people experience with really kind of getting the hang of things. But hopefully you'll get the hang enough to know if you want to use Tableau in your future work life. All right, so once again, so first I'll show you how to do this work in Excel and then we'll shift to Tableau. Okay, here. So let's first begin by looking at getting a sense of who is participating in library instruction. And then we'll tie that instruction to retention. And the work we're going to do that'll allow us to visualize and generate these insights is all going to come from another pivot table. So let's go ahead back to the clean data set. I'm going to click the upper left corner again, insert in pivot table. And I'm going to just say use that default. And let's see, I'm just going to call this pivot for visualizations or something like that. Just something to keep it apart from our other pivot tables we created. So let's begin once again with just understanding who is participating in our library instruction. So I'm going to click here in this pivot table box, which should open up your pivot table fields again. And let's go ahead and work with the year one instruction dichotomous variable, year one instruction dicot. And I'm just going to pull that down into rows. So now over on the left, you should see in column A, rows representing 0 and 1. So if you weren't sure what 0 and 1 referred to, you could look at the clean data dictionary and you can just overwrite that 0 and say 0 is 0 live instruction sessions. I'm just typing right over it. And 1 is 1 plus live instruction sessions. And so now let's say we want to know how many people are in each group. To do that, I'm going back to the pivot table fields and I'm going to drag that same variable year one lib instruction dicot under values. And then I'm going to change the format from sum to count. So I'm clicking the downward arrow, value field settings, I'm going to change that to count. So now looking over here at our little pivot table, we can see that looks like just over 2/3 of students did not participate in instruction, and 1/3 did. I also often find it helpful when I'm reporting data or visualizing data to put things in terms of percentages. So percentages just are a little easier for our brains to interpret because they're relative rather than looking at the raw figures. So if you wanted to look at this in terms of percentages, you could simply click in one of these cells in the pivot table and right click and show values as percent of column total. And I'm just going to take a look here. So now we can see that 60.8% of our students did not receive instruction, 39.19 did. So one of the nice things about pivot tables is you can bring in filters, which allows you to disaggregate or kind of hone in on specific subgroups. And you can do that in pivot tables, and Tableau is really great for that. But to add in some filters, you would simply go back up here to your pivot table fields, and anything that can be categorized or has a category can become a filter. For example, say we're interested in looking at how we're doing reaching freshman students versus transfer students. That would be the enrollment status. Just going to pull enrollment status down here under filters, which you can see up on top here. Now we have a new little area that's for that filter. You could pull down a whole bunch of filters like race, first generation, college, again, whatever you wish. So let's see if how things look when we look at freshman students versus transfers. So under enrollment status in this cell column B, I'm just going to click that little downward caret. That 1 represents freshmen. If we couldn't remember, we could go back here and say 1 in our data dictionary relates to freshmen, 2 relates to transfers. So let's look at freshmen first. So you can see here that the results in our table change. So it looks like with respect to freshmen, we reach about 50% of our students with library instruction, which is a little better than the population at large. Let's change that and select the 2 representing transfer students. And you can see that we're not doing so well reaching our transfer students. Looks like 79% of our transfer students did not participate in instruction in year 1. So using filters can be quite illuminating. Let's see here. If you wanted to look at colleges, again, let's see. I happen to know that our College of Health and Human Services, which is college number 6, has a great library presence. So let's put in a filter to include 6. That's the College of Health and Human Services. So, and let's look at C, I'm calling them a CHHS, and let's also add in a filter. So we're looking at the freshman students. So now we're freshmen within that college. We can see we have reached 73% of our students in instruction, 26% we did not reach. If we change that to look at our transfer students, we did not reach 92% of our transfer students. So I find the filters can be very illuminating. So now that we have a sense of how we're doing with our instruction reach to first year students, let's add in the retention variable so we can begin to understand is there a relationship between instruction and retention rates. So this is where I think it gets fun. So at this point, I'd make sure all of my filters are reset. They all say all. That just means we're not honing in on specific category, which is what I want. So now I'm just clicking in our pivot table to bring up those fields again. So let's see, let's keep library instruction dichotomous in rows. We can keep our filters in place. Under values, let's remove this instruction dichotomous variable. Oops, I clicked the wrong thing, it looks like. I'm going to say remove field. And in place of that, let's add in retention. So I'm just going to, up here on the top under the fields, I'm going to drag retention down. And I am going to change that to from sum to counts. I think I did that wrong. Hold on a moment. Oh, and we also want to drag, so I didn't do that wrong. I just forgot a step. Let's also drag retention down under columns. This is more like it. So now looking at our table, we have zeros under these column headings. We have 0 and 1. So you may recall from working with our retention variable that 0 means they were not retained. I'm just going to type in, overwrite the 0 and the 1 to be not retained and retained. So now we have this little table, 0 library instructions. We have the not retained and the retained, and 1 or more library instructions, not retained and retained. And once again, looking at raw numbers can be a little bit hard on our brains. And so I find it helpful to turn things into percentages. This time, rather than looking at percentages based on vertical columns, let's look at the percentages based on rows. So I'll show you what I mean here. I'm clicking in this first box for 0 sessions not retained. I'm going to right click and then show values as this time we're choosing percent of row total. And I'm just going to hide these blank columns just so we can focus a little more easily. So what this is telling us is that for students who did not participate in instruction, the retention rate was 78.7%, meaning 79% of students stayed in school for a second year if they did not receive library instruction. Whereas for students who participated in 1 or more sessions, we have a much higher, noticeably higher retention rate of almost 87%. Again, we can't say there's a cause and effect, but there is a noteworthy relationship. And you could do statistical analyses to determine if it's a significantly different, like students who do this have significantly higher outcomes than students who don't. And the modules, the self-paced modules Devin mentioned, will be covering that. So we could also look at, apply the filters accordingly. So we could look at our transfer students, and we can see the numbers changed a little, but not too much compared to our freshman students. So pretty consistent regardless of enrollment status. At this point, I often find it's helpful to create a visualization to help me dig into the results a little further. And doing that in a pivot table is super easy. You can just simply, I've just clicked in the pivot table, going to insert. I usually just check recommended charts. And then the default bar graph the bar graphs are far and wide the easiest for people to interpret. I'm just going to make the font size just a little bigger. And I know this is not pretty, and I would typically wouldn't share this version of the bar graph with big wigs or decision makers. This is really more of a tool to help me understand what I'm seeing in my data. If I was going to create a pretty report, I would take the data out of a pivot table and just work with static numbers. When we're working with the pivot table, it's all reliant upon underlying formulas. So anyway, this is just for us to unlock our insights. I'm going to add in, I'm clicking the upper right corner. I'm going to add in some data labels. And let's see here. So now let's take a look here. So you can see it's one thing to look at a table, but it's another thing to look at a graph. So we can see here a little more readily that retention rates are higher. That's what's in orange for students who participate in instruction versus those who do not. And then we can apply our filters. You can either use the filters here within the chart or over in the pivot table. They work the same. So then I could look at those freshman students. So 80, we had an 87% retention rate for students who participated in instruction who were freshmen versus the transfer students, 86% retention rate. So very similar. And then we could fool around. We know that college number 6 is CHHS. We can see retention rates are pretty similar. Let's look at the retention rates for CHHS students who are transfers and see what happens. Moves a little. So essentially, you could play around with the filters to dig around, but essentially this is kind of telling us that students who participate in library instruction, first-year students, have higher retention rates than those who do not. And we'd have to dig around a little further, but it seems like the patterns hold fairly consistent regardless of enrollment status. I'm just resetting our filters. For first generation students, the 0 is not first gen. So we have a retention rate of 87.2%. And then 1 means they're first gen, 86%. So there are minor fluctuations depending on the subgroupings. But again, we can fairly confidently say there's a noteworthy chance that library instruction contributes to success, retention. So we can do pretty much the same type of work in Tableau. Tableau, again, it's a little easier to share. You can make things look a little prettier. So I am going to open up Tableau, and you can do the same if you downloaded it. Otherwise, you can just follow along, and I'll show you kind of the mirror version of doing this same work here. So the first thing you need to do, and your Tableau is probably going to look a little different because I have all these other files I've been working on, which populates my window. But the functionality for you will hopefully be the same. So the first thing I'm going to do is we need to connect to a file, and we're going to connect to our Excel file. So I'm just going to select Excel. And I'm going to select this same sample data set. I'm going to click on it and select OK. And it takes a little bit of time to open things up sometimes. So you probably just get a kind of this almost blank screen. Over on the left under Sheets, you'll see these are the various tabs that are in our Excel sheet. And we're going to drag over the one clean data set. Let's drag that over into our working window. And so now, once I did that, you can see here that we have a mirror version or an almost mirror version of our Excel file that's now placed within this Tableau file. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a file, save as, and I'm going to just save this as whatever you want to call it, practice file. But really what I wanted to show you is under save as type to click and select the one that's the Tableau packaged workbook, ends in TWBX. That way it saves a copy of the data within the Tableau rather than it always having to actively link to the Tableau. It won't really impact your work now, but if you were publishing things in the future, then you might find it useful. So we've got our data loaded into Excel, and then down on the bottom, you see some little tabs. The first one is Sheet 1. The next one, it looks like a graph with a plus sign. That is what you'd click on to create other sheets. Within each worksheet is where you create a single visualization. And then this third little tab over that looks like a window with a box, that is where you put together a dashboard that can have several visualizations in the same place. And then that fourth option that looks like a book with a plus, that allows you to create visualization stories. They behave quite similarly to dashboards. We're not going to work on those today, but they're a very friendly tool. Again, they operate very similarly to dashboards. But we need to first create some visualizations. So let's go click on Sheet 1, which brings up a screen that looks like this. Before we can begin with our visualization, we need to get our data in the appropriate format. Tableau does its best to interpret what we intend with the data formats, but I see this time we need to do just a little housekeeping. So generally, anything above this line over here on the left, anything above it should be in blue and will be, that's where most of your variables will live. And anything below the line will be the things that can be counted or summed or percentages calculated. So we need to do some conversions to get what we need up on top to be discrete variables that are in a dimension format, which I'm just going to click here in this downward arrow under retention, and we want to convert that to a discrete variable. The next one on the list that is not blue is libBooksCat. Convert that to discrete. So up on top, looks like we're just converting those that are not green to discrete, which makes them blue. And then the only thing on the bottom that we really want to remain is clean data set count and measure values. Anything else we want to push up into the dimensions, the blue category. So for these, starting with College Cat, we need to convert it to a dimension. Enrollment status, converting. First gen, converting. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and save my file. You'll only need to do this once, the converting. So hopefully now your variables look a little more like what I have here. And for this first tab, let's work on, I'm just going to call it retention. We're going to just create a simple little frequency table that indicates the number of students retained and then the percent of total students retained. So we'll do that for retention and instruction, then we'll create a graph that shows retention and instruction together. So for the retention table, let's see here. Let's drag the year 1 to year 2 retention, that's 5th or so on the list. Let's drag that up under rows up here in the in this section. And you can see here we have 0 and 1. Let's go ahead and change those to words. So I'm just simply clicking on the downward caret for retention. I'm going to edit aliases. And then for 0, over on the right under value, I'm going to say not retained. For 1, I'm going to say retained. So once we do that once, it'll be set up for the rest of our work for that particular variable. Let's see, what else shall we do? Let's just take this clean data set count, which is down under green, and let's just bring it up. And that shows this weird looking chart. And really, for this instance, I'm really more interested in a table. Over on the right side under show me, you can see we have a lot of different options here. I just want to look at a simple table for now, but you can see there's lots of different things you can do. I am going to I want the count or the number of students retained, and then I want the percent of total students retained. So I'm going to bring up these counts. I'm going to bring them up 2 times. And for the second one up here under rows, I'm going to turn that into a percent of total calculation. Just clicking on the downward caret for one of those counts, scrolling down, and selecting percent of total. And let's go back over to the right and put that back in a tabular format. I see I did something crazy. 1 second. That's not how I wanted things to look. I'm sorry. I'm going to remove that. Never supposed to happen that things don't work right when you're doing a demo. I'm just working with those same variables down here under marks. Let's bring those back up and see if that makes a difference. That's more like it. Hopefully, if you couldn't follow along, hopefully if you go back and look at those last few minutes of the recording, you can figure that out. And then if you wanted to know the sum total for each of those, we could go up here in the left to analytics, summarize totals, and then just drag this down to say we want to summarize column totals. So now, again, this is that same retention data we were looking at in Excel, but now we have a tidy little table. Now, the beautiful thing about Tableau is the filtering. So I'm just going to get myself ready to do some filtering by dragging over anything that I may want to have a future filter. I'm going to drag it over under this filter section and select all. Let's see, enrollment status. And right now, all of these things are in codes. We'd need to spend a few minutes turning those into words using the alias feature. And I'll give you a cleaned up Tableau file after the recording or after the session so that you can play with this and the aliases are already entered. Okay, so we've got the filters ready. We'll actually add the filters in when we create our dashboard. So let's now create a similar table for instruction. So I'm going to go down here on the bottom under retention, and I'm going to right click and say duplicate. And I'm going to rename that to be instruction. So now let's just simply replace retention with the instruction dichotomous variable. So I'm going to remove retention. I'm going to find that library instruction dichotomous variable. And this red means that something's wrong with our formulas. That's okay. We're just going to remove this count that's red. Let's just remove it. So now we're looking at library instruction. I'm going to add in some aliases. So 0 means no instruction. 1 means 1 plus library instruction. And then if I wanted to do that percent of total for this one, just like the retention, I'm going to drag clean data set count up under this section over here, marks. Just like before, we're going to click one of those and say percent of total. And then I'm going to, let's see what happens if we drag up measure values. And we can do filter. Whoops, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to remove that and drag up each of these counts independently. And then I'm going to select the table over here on the right. So now we can see we have the 0 instruction and the 1 plus instructions. So now let's just spend these last couple of minutes creating a visualization, a graph, using these bits of information. So I am going to duplicate the instruction. I tend to duplicate a lot of these fields simply so that it carries the filtering forward. Just saves me some legwork. So I'm going to duplicate instruction. I'm going to call this instruction by retention. Okay. And I am going to, let me see what I want to do. Under columns, let's put in the instruction dichotomous variable. I'm just going to remove some stuff. I'm moving library instruction up under columns. Let's put, see, looking for retention. Let's put retention under rows for now. We still have a little bit of cleanup to do. I am going to, from my measure values, I'm going to remove the count here. The one that does not have the triangle. The one that has the triangle is the percent of total. I'm going to remove this. So now let's take a look at what we're looking at. If we wanted to enter or add in the percentages, we could simply, like the data labels, we could simply under marks, click label, show mark labels. And one nice thing about Tableau is you can move the items around until they make sense for you. So this time we're looking at no instruction, 71% were not retained, 58% were retained. That doesn't seem quite right. I think we need to tell our computer that we need to reorganize the percents of total using count. So under this count, we have our percent of total, but let's keep our percent of total within each pane. So the no instruction section is a pane, and the 1+ library instruction session is a pane. So let's try this. Under count, and then compute using, let's select pane. That's more like it. So now for the no instruction group, we can see that 77% almost were retained versus we have a higher retention rate for the 1 or more library instruction sessions, which matches what we did in Excel. And then finally, I know we're super short on time. Let's put that into a dashboard with filters. So I'm going to click this little window pane here, the dashboard pane. And to create your dashboard, it's really easy. I'm just going to, under Sheets, drag each of these sheets into my my window. You can do it however you want it to look. But now the fun thing is to add in those filters. So if you click in any one of these visualizations and select filters, you can select each of the filters that you want to add in. For now, let's just do enrollment status, and let's just do a couple, first generation status or so. And again, with those aliases, you would have words corresponding to each of those. But for enrollment status, remember 1 are freshmen, 2 are transfer students. First thing we need to do is make sure the filters apply to all of the visualizations. So we would just simply click the downward arrow and select apply to worksheets, to apply to all worksheets on the dashboard. Okay, so now enrollment status. If we just wanted to hone in on the freshmen, those ones, we can see the results for the freshman students. If we want to look at the transfer students, we could see data related only to the transfer students. I'll share that cleaned up Tableau file that you can play with on your own after our session today. And I have completely run through my whole allotted time. And I had hoped to share a little bit of information about taking your results and turning them into actionable insights. I hope that my slides will be pretty self-explanatory, but it's going back to your questions like, do undergraduate students who do something in the library have higher retention rates? Using the dashboards to answer the questions. For example, this is undergraduate students overall. I'd fill in their retention rates using those dashboards I created to then answer our question. Yes, first year students who participated in library instruction had noticeably higher retention rates than those who did not. And then those dashboards could be used to answer these corresponding questions related to first time in college freshmen, transfer students, etc. And then from there, I would spend some time thinking about my user story and going back to, remember the user story said, I want to understand this so that I can encourage faculty to use more library resources. So then I would make an action plan to do that work. And I know that we are right at 3:30. I will be sure to give Devin the slides and the cleaned up files for you to explore on your own. and I thank you very much.
Becky, thank you so much for demonstrating this process.
You're
Really
welcome.
appreciate it.
I'm sorry I ran out of time.
Oh, you're all good. And folks, know that you can reach out to Becky with questions. Her email is included on the slides. Expect an email from me tomorrow with the recording that will be uploaded on our YouTube channel with timestamps, a feedback survey. So please let us know future topics, what you liked, any sort of comments. And then also I'll include Becky's slides and the Tableau file. But thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, take care.